Any actions are followed by consequences, and these consequences do not always turn out to be positive. Many people, pursuing personal desires, are ready to destroy the lives of those who do not deserve it. Betrayal is the worst. Cindy met and fell in love with Rick Thomas during their junior year of college. He was fun, energetic, and had a unique ability to make her laugh like no one else. Rick always found creative ways to surprise her and knew exactly how to show he cared. Sometimes they would take long Sunday walks or sneak into one of the empty classroom buildings on campus to sit and talk for hours. He was both handsome and kind, a rare combination in college. Her parents adored him from the moment they met, and his family was equally taken with Cindy. Rick's sister, Kathy, even joked, "If he ever breaks up with you, we'll definitely miss him." By the middle of their final semester, Rick secured an entry-level job with a major investment firm on the West Coast. Cindy, who had earned a degree in education, began looking for teaching positions in Orange County, close to Rick's new job in Anaheim. She was soon hired to teach 7th grade math in a local school district. To celebrate their new jobs, Rick took her to a special dinner in San Clemente, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Just before dessert, he got down on one knee and proposed with a beautiful ring, just under 2 carats, set in a gold band that had belonged to his paternal grandmother. Cindy, overwhelmed with joy, hugged Rick tightly and whispered, "Yes, yes, forever, yes," as the surrounding patrons burst into applause. Fast forward 9 years. Cindy was now 32 and a mother to 6-year-old twins, Michael and Sarah. She was still teaching but had grown weary of the low pay and long hours. While she loved certain aspects of her job, being away from her family and dealing with difficult parents had convinced her it was time for a change. Both she and Rick were good with finances, so Cindy was able to leave her teaching job, even if it took a year to find something new. It only took 5 months, and it happened purely by chance. Cindy had stayed in touch with her best friend from college, Kelly, whom she had met during their freshman year. They immediately hit it off and became roommates for all 4 years of college. After graduation, they lived together during Cindy's 9-month engagement to Rick. If Cindy was fun-loving and adventurous, Kelly was a whirlwind. Kelly didn't just take risks. She seemed to be unaware of the concept entirely. She lived in the moment and rarely stopped to consider the consequences. Without any look-before-you-leap instinct, Kelly often led them on wild adventures. Fortunately, Cindy was there to balance things out and look out for her. More than once, Cindy had pulled Kelly away from potential disaster. Though Kelly would get angry in the moment, she always later thanked Cindy for being the friend she both loved and needed. Once again, Cindy was ready to come to Kelly's aid if needed, and, as fate would have it, this time it also changed the course of her own career. At the end of January, Kelly called Cindy and asked her to go on a date with her at the wedding, which will take place in 3 weeks. Kelly's boss was getting married in Napa, and she was excited about the upcoming celebration. She couldn't wait to see what adventures could happen, perhaps even romantic ones. However, Kelly has matured emotionally and realized that it would be better if she had her faithful partner by her side. "It's going to be so much fun, Cindy," Kelly assured her friend. "There's going to be a lot of wine, dancing, and a bunch of cute young professionals." "Married, we have twins, sis," Cindy replied. "So much fun for who exactly?" "Oh, don't be such a bore," Kelly retorted. "Let down your gorgeous blonde hair. Some time away from Rick, and the kids might give you strength." "Rick gives me strength as it is, thank you very much, sis. How about I take it with me?" "Sorry, girlfriend. The invitation says guest, not guests," Kelly said, wishing her friend would be more carefree at least sometimes. Cindy ended the conversation by promising to talk to Rick and call her back. Later that evening, when the children were already in bed, Cindy shared this idea with her husband. His answer didn't surprise her. "You'd better go and look after her, Cinderella," he said, calling her by his pet name. "I'm sure it will be fun. Maybe you could stop by Frog's Leap and buy us a box of their 2016 cab." When she asked about the kids, Rick replied, "I've been wanting to visit Mom and Dad for a long time. It's been 4 months since we last saw them, so I'm sure they'll jump at the chance to spend a long weekend with their grandchildren. Go take care of your friend and have a no-twins weekend, baby." Cindy couldn't help but wonder how she managed to marry such a good-natured and generous man, not to mention that he was handsome. After about 10 minutes, she was already expressing her gratitude to him, making love to him for almost an hour. 3 weeks later, a somewhat frustrated Cindy found herself seated at a table in one of Napa's nicer wineries. She watched as Kelly danced with one of the groomsmen, who was likely about 8 years younger. While keeping an eye on her lively friend, Cindy engaged in conversation with one of the bride's cousins. They discussed their observations about weddings, noting that this one had started late and was generally disorganized. The cousin Sally casually remarked, "Someone could make a fortune if they were a great event coordinator." This comment got Cindy thinking, even as she pondered how to extricate Kelly from her 22-year-old dance partner, who clearly had more than salsa on his mind. It took about 6 months to get everything in place, but Cindy was finally launching her new career with her own event planning business, We Plan, You Play. Naturally organized, her lesson plans and classroom execution had always been flawless, so transitioning to weddings, reunions, business meetings, and other gatherings came naturally. She studied several successful companies, thoroughly researched what it took to carve out the right niche, and pursued her newfound passion with relentless determination. 2 years in, she was thriving, particularly with smaller destination weddings along California's stunning coast. That's when she met Bennett Davis. Bennett owned and operated 3 upscale boutique hotels, all ideal for destination weddings. His properties were located in San Diego, Santa Barbara, and the Monterey Peninsula, and he had achieved significant success. He worked tirelessly, had an exceptional staff whom he compensated well, and he expected nothing less than excellence from them. At the age of 26, Bennett took a huge risk, investing everything he had, and more, to purchase a dilapidated 90-year-old mansion in Santa Barbara. With just enough funds and a lot of courage, he managed to open it on time and slightly under budget. The first 2 years were grueling, with Bennett working over 100 hours a week, 7 days a week. He nearly failed because, despite positive word of mouth, it spread agonizingly slowly. However, by the 3rd year, he broke even, and in the 4th year, profits began to roll in. 3 years later, he opened a hotel in San Diego, and 2 years after that, the Monterey Gem became a reality. 14 years into the business, Bennett remained dedicated, working long hours, but he was also known to enjoy life, especially when it involved fine wine, dancing, and the company of women. Women who knew him well described him as a CBNA, a confirmed bachelor but not an asshole. He treated people fairly and honestly, even when making it clear to potential female suitors that he wasn't looking for a long-term relationship. At 40, Bennett was comfortable in his own skin and content with the life he had built. About 16 months before Cindy's crisis, Davis Bennett and his head of staff, Lori Templeton, were wandering through the LA Convention Center on South Figueroa, attending a gathering of service providers in the hospitality industry. Near the end of the 3rd aisle, after seeing nothing particularly interesting, they came across Cindy Thomas and her We Plan You Pay display. Bennett later confided in Cindy that he was impressed by her presentation, but it was her bright blue eyes, which hinted at a mischievous personality, that truly caught his attention. Cindy would later admit to him that she did a very subtle double take when she first spotted him because, in her words, he was gorgeous, but didn't look like a jerk. They struck up a 45-minute conversation that was professional, yet the connection between them was immediate. He asked her some challenging questions. What was her track record? Who were the key members of her team? How did she interact with the property leadership? What was her worst event and why? Her best event and why? How did she calculate overhead and profit margins? He also managed to slip in a few casual yet slightly personal questions. What's your favorite wine? Can you dance at all? Do you prefer the beach or the mountains? He noticed her wedding ring but was simply enjoying some light-hearted conversation while assessing whether she was someone he wanted to do business with. She responded enthusiastically to his questions. She could tell he was knowledgeable about his field, but didn't take himself too seriously. She also appreciated his more personal approach. Pinot Noir, specifically from the Willamette Valley, preferably 2014. Evening Land. La Source, from Eola Amity Hills, is a favorite. I can waltz if necessary, but the Carlton, the Twist, and the Tango are my favorites, though only with my husband. Mountains in the winter, any quiet beach in the summer. She smiled as she answered, but chose not to ask any questions about him. Lori Templeton observed all this with a knowing grin. She recognized when her boss was genuinely interested in someone. He was always polite and friendly with everyone, but he had a way of leaning in slightly when he was truly engaged with the person he was speaking to. As they wrapped up the conversation and exchanged all the necessary information, Bennett said, Mrs. Templeton and I are going to have dinner at Fogo de Chao in a couple of hours. Would you care to join us? Lori noticed he used her formal name, something he rarely did, and assumed he wanted to ensure Cindy knew his intentions were entirely appropriate. Cindy politely declined, explaining that she planned to head home after dismantling her display to see Rick and the twins before bedtime. However, she did express interest in a site visit and asked if that could be arranged in the next couple of weeks. By the end of the conversation, they agreed she would visit his original location in Santa Barbara, his favorite of the three, a week from Wednesday for lunch and a tour. Lori and Cindy exchanged numbers. Cindy shook hands with both of them, and their initial interaction came to an end. As they walked away, Lori kept glancing at Bennett. He could feel her gaze. What? He asked as innocently as possible. I assume you noticed the ring on her left hand, boss. Well, a guy can flirt every now and then, can't he? He replied, pretending to be hurt. Without looking at him, she knowingly replied, Oh, is that what it was? Cindy's site visit couldn't have gone better. She had agreed to meet Bennett and Lori for lunch. Although it was only about 120 miles from her home in Orange County, Cindy gave herself 4 hours to make the trip. She did it in just under 3, so she had a little time to check out the old Mission, which was less than a 15-minute drive from the hotel. Always punctual, she arrived at 11:45. The parking attendant opened her door, smiled warmly, and said, Welcome to the Winfield Scott Hotel, Mrs. Thomas. She was encouraged that her hosts might indeed live up to their reputation. As Cindy began to ascend the short stairs into the hotel lobby, she glanced up and saw Bennett Davis. He was impeccably dressed in neatly pressed khaki slacks and a crisp, dark blue M.J. Bale shirt. His loafers and belt were made of fine Italian leather. His attire accentuated his ruggedly handsome features, with the deep blue shirt making his dark hair and even darker brown eyes stand out. Cindy rarely noticed other men beyond Rick. She wasn't prudish or naive. She simply found Rick so attractive that others didn't compare. But Bennett was on par in the looks department, maybe even a step above, and this took her by surprise. She also noticed Lori wasn't by his side. I'm so glad you could make it, Cindy. I'm excited to show you the place and discuss how a partnership could benefit both of us, Bennett said, extending his hand in greeting. Thanks, Bennett. At first glance, the place looks beautiful, Cindy replied, taking his hand with a warm smile. Perhaps neither of them realized it yet, but the connection they felt when they first met in LA was real. They both valued hard work and success, and neither was pretentious or cared for people who were. They were both driven to be the best versions of themselves, and neither was hard to look at. Cindy opted for a light yet modest black Tory Burch sleeveless sundress, paired with a pastel painted linen scarf that made her bright blue eyes shine. The dress fell just above her knees, showing off the perfect amount of her long legs. Her Stuart Weitzman sandals were both comfortable and elegant, with enough heel to boost her height from 5 feet 7 inches to nearly 5 feet 8 inches. Cindy was practical. She knew that men like Bennett appreciated a woman's appearance, which could be an advantage in business. Still, her friends often described her as innocent as a dove, but cunning as a fox. As she took Bennett's offered arm, she immediately began asking questions about the property as they strolled into the hotel lobby. Every staff member seemed to know her by name, and when they reached the patio for lunch, a small vase of Californian wildflowers adorned the table. The lavender, deep red, and bright white blooms contrasted beautifully with the white linen and Pacific blue backdrop. It wasn't surprising to see a bottle of the Pinot Noir Cindy had mentioned when they first met. As Bennett pulled out her chair, she thought, "This guy is sharp. I'll need to stay on my toes so I don't get outmaneuvered." They chatted for a few minutes about the drive, the recent wildfires, and the stunning ocean view. Within 10 minutes, Lori came bouncing around the corner, smiling and carrying a small folder for the business portion of the meeting. Cindy stood up to hug her. While she was intrigued by Bennett, she genuinely liked Lori and was happy to see her. The three of them continued chatting over lunch for another 45 minutes before shifting to business. Cindy had limited herself to just a glass and a half of wine, making it clear she was there to focus on work, not leisure. After lunch, Lori excused herself, and Bennett spent the next hour giving Cindy a comprehensive tour of the Winfield Scott. Cindy was no stranger to the industry and had done her research. She knew the hotel was likely named after the famous 1583 shipwreck off the Santa Barbara coast, which reportedly went down with $1.5 million in gold bullion. She jokingly suggested that perhaps Bennett's success was linked to treasure hunting. Bennett smiled, winked, and said, "That's not the kind of treasure I'm after." They laughed and continued the tour. Lori rejoined them a little later, and they headed to Bennett's office to discuss business in detail. They reached several mutually beneficial agreements about Cindy bringing weddings and family reunions to Bennett's properties, and everyone seemed optimistic about the potential. In the late afternoon, with their business concluded, Bennett had Cindy's white VW Passat brought around to the front. Lori said her goodbyes, leaving Cindy and Bennett alone for a moment. Bennett shook her hand firmly, yet warmly, perhaps holding it a bit longer than necessary, and said, "It's been a pleasure spending the day with you and getting to know you better. I'm confident we can achieve great things together, but I'm also glad to have connected with you personally." He then leaned in and gave her a polite kiss on the cheek. Cindy smiled, thanked him for a wonderful day, and mentioned she would follow up with Lori about a few weddings she thought would be perfect for the location. When she drove down the long driveway and drove out of the house, she experienced an unexpected sensation. She felt a strong physical attraction to Bennett. She tried to push these thoughts away, but the image of Bennett standing at the top of the stairs when she entered, the small details that he had perfected, and his gentle kiss on her cheek before leaving kept coming back to her. Still lost in her daydreams, she glanced in the rearview mirror before changing lanes. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed a book on the back seat. It must have been one of Sarah's favorite books, which she had left at home. The most amazing thing was lying face up, and it suddenly brought Cindy back to reality. "Oh, girl," she thought, "you're spending too much time with Kelly. You're not a 16-year-old sophomore student, you're a happily married woman. Gather your thoughts. She was genuinely concerned about her actions. She was married to a wonderful man and had 2 wonderful children. There was no place in her life for her to act like a carefree teenager, let alone flirt with someone who wasn't Rick Thomas. After spending 20 minutes berating herself, she turned on a podcast about women's issues in business to relax. However, if she were honest with herself, she would admit that she was dangerously close to crossing the line. Back at the hotel, Bennett headed to his office to quickly settle some business matters. Then he retired to his room to relax before an evening walk on the beach. He lay down on the bed, thinking about the day and, in particular, about her. She was amazing both inside and out. Bennett dated many attractive women, some even breathtaking, but none like Cindy. Her eyes, her personality, her exceptional legs, the way she moved, and especially the way she walked away, all flashed through his mind. She was married, damn it, but she was incredible. At the same time, Rick was at home with Michael and Sarah and cooking dinner. As he walked around the kitchen, cooking and laughing with the kids, he couldn't help but think about Cindy. It was at this moment that he realized how truly lucky he was. When Cindy arrived, the table was set, and they spent a wonderful hour enjoying their meal, while Sarah told how she found Ralph the neighbor's cat in their yard, played with him for a while, and then saw Mrs. Bowling come to take him home. Sarah even suggested that maybe they should get a pet. Later, when the children fell asleep, Cindy, perhaps wanting to confirm her devotion to Rick, fulfilled her marital duty. During this, she introduced Bennett instead of her husband. 6 months and 4 weddings hosted at Winfield Scott later, the boundaries had been crossed, though not without prior indications. It might have begun with an unintentional touch on the arm, or Bennett's hand resting on the small of her back while he held the door open for her. Perhaps it was the frequent visits Bennett made whenever Cindy's company was on site. Regardless of the specifics, Cindy never avoided his gestures, compliments, or even subtle flirtations. Rick had accompanied her only once to visit the venue, but it was early on, and Bennett was reportedly away on other business that day. It was nearly 1 a.m. Cindy and Lori had just bid farewell to the very pleased parents of the bride after another extravagantly successful wedding. The cleanup crew was almost finished when Cindy and Lori sat on the patio, savoring a lovely glass of Dom Perignon left over from the reception. Technically, they may have accidentally slipped it out from the bar into Lori's tote bag, which ended up in the back of the hotel's giant walk-in refrigerator under a box of lettuce. But such things can happen. "I know it's late," Lori said, kicking off her uncomfortable shoes, "but can we talk for a minute?" "Of course," Cindy replied, following her example and rubbing her toes. "Is there something specific you want to discuss?" "You know that I really enjoyed working with you, and I consider you a friend, right?" Lori said with a note of doubt in her voice. Cindy nodded, curious to see where this was going. "I usually don't like to interfere in other people's affairs, but I need to tell you something. Otherwise, I'll feel like I'm letting you down. Is this normal?" Cindy nodded in agreement. "You know he'll start hitting on you if you let him," Lori said quietly. Cindy raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything, so Lori continued. "Both of you are very dear to me, but from the first day we met in Los Angeles, I realized that you are exactly the woman Bennett is attracted to. Frankly, you are incredibly attractive both inside and out. You have a sharp mind and a stunning appearance that drives him crazy. The only reason he's not being persistent is because he respects you and your marriage. I can't say that he would never jeopardize your marriage, because it's not true. He may think that keeping it a secret won't do any harm, but deep down, he understands the possible consequences. What makes him such a good businessman is his ability to anticipate what others don't see. So he's keeping his distance for now, but if he feels you're interested, he won't hesitate to follow you. Cindy listened attentively, although she tried to maintain eye contact with Lori, whose gaze was neither accusing nor condemning, but was far from gentle. Lori, I don't understand how you can have an affair with Bennett and keep your life together. He won't take you away from Rick and marry you. You can't divorce your husband, leave the twins, and sail off into the sunset. Bennett is not the type to leave you. In fact, regardless of whether you are engaged in intimacy or not, he is likely to remain a friend for life. He's crazy about you and incredibly loyal. It's not just the business side of things, although it makes a big impression on him. He loves you for who you are, as a person. But he'll never be ready to settle down with you. You need to decide if you want to keep your family the way it is, or if you need a casual relationship with a high probability of destroying your marriage. Tears welled up in Cindy's eyes as she answered, "Oh, Lori, I'm so confused. I do not know what to do. Rick is an amazing person. Even 10 years after our marriage, we still laugh easily, have meaningful conversations, and are great in bed. He supports me and challenges me in all the right ways. I can't imagine my life without him, and the thought of hurting him makes me feel almost physically ill. But Bennett?" Her voice faltered as she searched for the right words. "He's intoxicating in a way that Rick doesn't. I feel like he's dangerous, but in a kind of exciting way." She paused for a moment, taking a few sips of champagne. Lori gave her space to think without interrupting. She wanted her new friend to grapple with the reality of her situation on her own, without any interference. Whatever decision Cindy made, it had to be her own. Lori had summoned the courage to tell her the truth, but now it was time to be silent and listen. "I've never been overwhelmed by anyone before. I fell deeply in love with Rick fairly quickly, but I wouldn't say I was so enraptured that I lost control. The feelings I have for Bennett are entirely different. When he looks at me in a certain way, touches my hand, or even leans in slightly, I just melt. I don't understand it, but I know that if the moment were right and he led me to his bed, I would follow willingly, eager to give myself to him." She continued, 6 months ago, I would have been appalled if anyone suggested that someone could be more appealing than my husband, or that I could get involved in an affair. I'm not a progressive. I think the idea that women should be free to stray while expecting their husbands to stay loyal is absurd. Marriage is a mutual commitment. The thought of Rick coming home and telling me he's been with someone else is devastating. So why am I being such a hypocrite and risking it all? "What are you going to do?" Lori asked gently, her heart aching for her friend. "Well, 80% of me wants to remain faithful to my husband and kids," Cindy began. "I won't stop working with you because it's too good a business opportunity to give up. That 80% believes I can manage my desires and stay true. But the other 20% keeps saying, 'Forget him, forget him, forget him.' It tells me I could keep this affair secret, let it run its course, and then return to how things should be. Honestly, I'm not sure. Most days I hope the 80% will prevail. But there are moments." At this, she buried her face in her hands and began to sob. Lori stood and moved to Cindy's side of the table. She wrapped her arms around her friend, holding her for a few moments in silence. Finally, she said, "You know the truth and the risks involved. I really hope you make the right choices from here on out." The next day, Lori walked into Bennett's office uninvited, a stern expression on her face. She met her boss's gaze and held his gaze for a moment before speaking. "If you sleep with her, I'll quit and never work for you again. And don't think you can hide it from me, boss. I have worked side by side with you almost every day for the last 7 years. I'll find out even if you try to hide it. I'll find out." Without waiting for an answer, She turned and, leaving almost, but not quite, slammed the door behind her. 3 weeks later, after Laurie's fight with Cindy and Bennett, a rare situation occurred. A sudden storm ruined an outdoor wedding, forcing everyone to move indoors in a hurry. Cindy and Laurie were directing the staff, trying to get the bride and groom into the hotel lobby. 4 hours later, well after midnight, they gathered everything they could. The reception was as good as it could be under the circumstances, and everyone went to their rooms. Cindy and Bennett were standing at the back of the patio, hiding in the shadows. Bennett put his arm around Cindy's shoulders, sensing her disappointment despite the uncontrollable weather. Her pursuit of perfection had always attracted him. When he hugged her, looking at the Pacific Ocean, he said, "You did everything you could, partner. You can't control Mother Nature, and everyone had a good time despite the rain. In a couple of years, this story will be laughed at the Thanksgiving table." Cindy didn't pull away. Instead, she rested her head on his chest. It was soothing. Cindy's resistance began to weaken. She took a deep breath, as if giving up, said nothing, and turned to hug Bennett, looking into his eyes. Before he bent down and kissed her, he said, "Think carefully. I'm not going to force myself on you. You have to want it as much as I do. If you don't want that, let's stay friends and business partners. We can always ask ourselves, what if? But if it's not 100% mutual, we should stop right now." In the next moment, 80% of the hesitation disappeared, the boundaries were crossed, and they took a step that both would regret in a few months for the rest of their lives. "Take me to bed," Cindy whispered. Bennett bent down and kissed her. "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever met," Bennett whispered, kissing her again. The next minute, Bennett picked her up in his arms. He dragged her into his bedroom. Neither of them noticed that Laurie was standing at the top of the patio, with tears in her eyes. The next 2 hours were really hot, and when it was over, they spent the next 2 hours talking in the language of lovers, whispering tender words and smiling and just spending time together. But later, they moved on to the second round again. By 4:30 a.m., they lay exhausted in each other's arms for a few moments, silently enjoying each other. Eventually, they began discussing how to keep their affair a secret. They talked about the measures they needed to take to avoid exposure. He was worried that she might be overcome with guilt, and that this would be a one-time occurrence. She assured him that she knows how to control her emotions and wants to see him as often as possible without arousing suspicion. Bennett made up the bed, washed the sheets himself. She kissed him, wished him good night morning, and said she would go home after sleeping for 3 to 4 hours. She wanted to rest before returning to her family, although, in fact, she wanted to sleep until noon. She knew it would arouse suspicion. He promised to accompany her when she left. Then Cindy quietly returned to her room, set the alarm, and immediately fell asleep. Bennett took the bed apart, washed the sheets himself, made the bed, and fell asleep before the morning crew arrived at 6:30 a.m. What could possibly go wrong? On Sunday, she arrived home in the afternoon. Sarah and Michael heard her drive up and rushed to meet her as soon as she got out of the car, hugging her waist. They were almost 8 years old, and they had grown up a lot. Despite the fact that she had only been away since lunch on Friday, they inundated her with joyful news about their weekend. Yesterday, Dad took us to a big children's park and we rode a giant slide. Ralph came back, and Mrs. Bowling brought us cookies when she picked him up. Dad made us pancakes with Mickey Mouse for breakfast and said that next week we could go to Disneyland to ride the rides. Mommy, did Daddy ever take you on rides with him? The last question made her flinch slightly. The mention of Daddy and rides brought back unpleasant memories from a conversation with her lover that had taken place just 12 hours ago. She thought to herself, yes, because of these rides, I had a strange gait today. She cringed inwardly when she saw Rick standing in the doorway, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel. He was wearing Adidas shorts and a cycling shirt. Damn it, she thought. He looks so good. What am I doing? Putting down her travel bag and hugging him, she said, "Hi, baby. It was a hard wedding. I'm so glad to be at home in your arms. I hope the twins weren't too violent." "We always miss you, Cinderella, but I appreciate the time spent with the kids on weekends. I'm so proud of how well you're doing in your business. I saw the news about the storm and realized that you have your hands full. Let me pour you a glass of wine and rub your feet." Damn, she thought. How affectionately he calls me. How much he loves children. How he sacrifices himself. Damn, that's not the word. Pull yourself together. Wine and foot massage. I can't lose him or this family. Later, when the children went to bed, they decided to drink wine and chat in the hot tub. Fortunately for Cindy and her exhausted nature, Rick admitted that he was very tired and asked to reschedule the meeting another time. On Monday, Rick asked her if she was interested in going out on Tuesday evening. She eagerly said yes. Early Tuesday morning, while Cindy was still asleep, he quietly packed a few things for both of them. Before leaving for work, he left her a note. "Dress for date night, nice, casual Cinderella. How about that bright blue sundress that shows off your legs if you're okay with that? Be ready around 4 p.m. Don't worry about the kids, everything's arranged. Patais and bra are optional." At 4 o'clock sharp, they hugged the kids and thanked Kelly, who was in town and had insisted on babysitting. They then jumped into the car and took off. Rick drove her to the Ritz-Carlton overlooking Dana Point. Cindy was overwhelmed when they pulled into the parking lot. "Is Kelly staying the night?" "Yep." "I didn't bring a change of clothes." "Well, I hope you won't need too many, but there's a bag in the trunk." While you were giving the kids an early bath, Kelly double-checked it. She might have swapped out what you'll be wearing to bed tonight. "You let her go through my lingerie drawer?" "Yep. She mentioned that your nightwear was a bit on the boring housewife side, but she found something bright pink she thought would work. She also said not to worry. She'll take you lingerie shopping this week." "You bastard." They enjoyed a long walk on the beach, followed by an incredible dinner, and then shared an hour of passionate love. Cindy had recovered from her time with Bennett and was now eager for her husband. Around midnight, they sat on their sixth-floor balcony, gazing out at the unusually calm Pacific Ocean, discussing their lives, dreams, and future. Rick revealed his exciting news that he was in line for a partnership, which meant more money and less travel. He even mentioned the possibility of joining her on some of her wedding weekends. As they looked out at the ocean, Rick couldn't see her face in the darkness, which meant he missed the first sign that something might be wrong. Cindy quickly recovered, stood up, and sat in his lap. "I'm so proud of you, Richard Michael Thomas," she said, showering him with kisses, and soon they were on their way to round 2, this time on the balcony. During a relaxed breakfast in bed, they picked up the conversation where they had left off a few hours earlier. "Babe, I'm so proud of your upcoming promotion, and I'd love for you to travel with me occasionally, but I hope you're not thinking I should give up my business just because we can afford it." "Never," Rick replied. "I know how much you love it, and your career is just as important to me as my own. You're amazing at what you do, and I want you to take it as far as you want. How did I find such an incredible guy?" she wondered to herself. "I can't mess this up. Bennett and I need to revisit our plans to make sure they're foolproof." She never once considered the complete lack of logic and love. There wasn't a hint of guilt, only a desire to live out this fantasy. In the years ahead, she would look back and wonder how she could have been so utterly selfish. Men were often accused of thinking with the wrong head. But in truth, Cindy was doing exactly that. As she entered her mid-30s, her libido was on the rise, and she somehow convinced herself that she could have it all without anyone getting hurt. She was certain that in a few years she and Bennett would part ways. She knew they had a strong emotional connection, but Bennett would never fall fully in love, and she would never abandon her family. He would find another woman to satisfy his needs, and she would enjoy a long life with her loving husband. She envisioned the twins' high school years, college, weddings, and grandchildren as part of a plan she believed was in the cards. Never, in her wildest dreams, could she have imagined the tragedy that was on the horizon. The following month, Rick was promoted to partner, and she had another wedding, this time at a hotel in San Diego. In between their passionate meetings, she had a long conversation with her lover about how to preserve their relationship. Cindy has been taking birth control pills for 2 years. After opening their business, she and Rick decided that 2 wonderful children were enough for them. Sleeping with Bennett once or twice a month was safe because they didn't have to worry about pregnancy. However, at the end of June, everything went awry. Bennett and Cindy were in his office at WS discussing some new terms of their agreement. Bennett initially offered some bonus incentives if Cindy attracted more customers than expected. Despite their ongoing romance, the business remained a business, and Cindy reminded Bennett of their deal. Bennett, recognizing her business acumen, was already agreeing to her terms when Lori suddenly appeared in the doorway. "I'm glad I caught you both together. I need to talk to both of you," Lori said without waiting for an invitation. She sat down in one of the leather chairs and continued. "Bennett, do you remember our conversation about 4 months ago?" Cindy's face first showed shock, then confusion. Bennett, being the best poker player, kept a neutral expression on his face. "The fact that you ignored my warning was unexpected, but perhaps inevitable. The night the storm hit, I was sitting in the courtyard on the 2nd floor and sipping wine when I saw you kissing. You," looks at Bennett, "then picked up Cindy," looks at her, "and carried her to your bed. It was one of the saddest moments of my adult life. Not just for me, but for what I think it will do to both of you." She continued, "I'm not here to judge, but I can't be part of this." Cindy started to protest, but Lori raised her hand to indicate she wasn't finished. "Actually, I guess I am judging. I think what you're doing is short-sighted and immaturely selfish. You're acting like teenagers, only thinking about your own satisfaction without considering the bigger consequences." I started looking for new job opportunities the following Monday. The only reason it's taken me this long is that I've had to sift through several good offers. I'm moving to Austin, Texas, in early August to work for an event planning company there. She then turned her attention to Cindy. "Remember, I warned you, Cindy. The consequences might not have hit yet, but don't think you can avoid them forever. I'm disappointed in you, even though we've only known each other for less than a year. You seem to lack common sense, not to mention loyalty to the vows you made before God, your family, and friends when you married Rick. He doesn't deserve what you're doing to him. I won't mention your kids because honestly, thinking about the harm this will eventually cause them makes me want to cry." Lori finished by addressing both of them. "I'll remain professional. I won't let this affect the good years we've had, and I intend to fulfill my commitments." Bennett visibly winced at this. "But please, only talk to me about work. Nothing about what you two are doing, no excuses, and no drama. The staff here is incredible, and they don't deserve to be dragged into this mess. I'll tell them that I simply couldn't pass up the opportunity, and I'm sure you'll find a suitable replacement. Your GM of bartending, Sharon, would be a great choice if you ask me, but that decision is yours. Thank you for 7 great years, and I wish you both success." Cindy got up and left the room, tears streaming down her face. Bennett lowered his head, muttering, "Damn." They sat in silence for a few minutes, a light breeze blowing through the open French doors. They had planned to spend the evening together with all the ensuing consequences, but this was clearly not meant to happen. Neither of them knew what to say. In the end, Cindy wiped away her tears. "Bennett, I'm going to go home. This is not the right time to find out anything. I know that we are both responsible, but I sincerely regret my involvement in what happened. I'll call you in a few days." Then she got up, left his office, and left the hotel. She asked the valet to bring her car around because she suddenly had to leave. She cried the whole way back to Orange County. She checked into the Courtyard Marriott Hotel using an American Express bank card because Rick had never checked that card. On the way, she stopped to buy a bottle of Maker's Mark. After checking into her room, she got drunk to the point of insensibility. The first shoe fell off. Lori followed through on her decision and relocated to Austin about 10 days after wrapping up her final 2 weeks working for Bennett. He didn't attempt to dissuade her or offer more money, knowing it would only offend her. He tried to bring up the topic a couple of times, but Lori refused to engage, simply responding, "There's nothing you can say, Bennett." Cindy wanted to reach out, but couldn't find the right words. Eventually, she texted Lori, "I'm sorry for how my actions hurt you. You warned me, but I can't let him go." In early September, the intimacy between Bennett and Cindy was somewhat off. Perhaps they were both grappling with guilt, or were just irritated by being called out by Lori. However, their desire for each other never completely faded, and by early October, they were back to their usual selves. One Saturday evening, after the morning wedding, they had an unusually long night to enjoy each other. They left Washington and drove Bennett's BMW M8 Series convertible along the coast to a secluded chalet in VRBO overlooking the Pacific Ocean. "Oh, that's just great!" Cindy purred, hugging her lover. He lifted her easily and carried her up the stairs. "There's an ocean view from the French doors in the bedroom, kid. Then take me upstairs. They've done their job." Before leaving, Cindy informed Rick that she would go exploring in the Monterey area and would not return until late Sunday evening. Although this was technically true, she omitted the fact that she would be traveling with her lover. Bennett had arranged for a late checkout at 2 p.m., so on Sunday morning they spent time in bed, strolled along the beach, enjoyed a late breakfast, and made love for 2 more hours before heading back. They stopped in Big Sur for a glass of wine before continuing their 5-hour drive south. Cindy felt incredibly pleased and grateful at the wheel. Her business was booming, her children were doing well, and she had 2 wonderful men in her life. She was sure that Lori's fears were groundless. It's been 15 months since she met Bennett, and 8 months since they started having an affair, something Cindy wouldn't even call an affair, and everything seemed perfect. Her complete disregard for Rick, her cunning and constant lies never caused her any doubts. In fact, she was so detached from reality that she considered her monthly antics with Bennett useful for her marriage. She soon realized how wrong she was. During the first weekend of December, Cindy was in charge of organizing a wedding at Bennett's Monterey Hotel, located just east of Berwick Park. The Spanish Moss venue, though smaller than Bennett's other options, was ideal for gatherings of up to 50 people. The Carlisle wedding had 38 guests, making it a straightforward event for Cindy to handle, and not all the hotel rooms were reserved. Had Bennett reviewed the reservation list, he would have seen that Mr. Thomas had booked the Belladonna suite, which featured an ocean view, a large whirlpool tub, and a king-size 4-poster bed. There was no mention of Mrs. Thomas. Mr. Thomas, the latest partner at his investment firm, planned to surprise his wife by joining her for the weekend. He had arranged for fresh-cut flowers, Cindy's favorite wine perfectly chilled, and the finest bubble bath oils. Although Rick didn't believe he and his wife had grown distant, he sensed a loss of connection and intimacy, attributing it to long work hours and raising children. He was about to realize how mistaken he was. Since none of the local staff had met Rick before, he was able to remain incognito until the rehearsal dinner concluded and Cindy finished her tasks. Although he had spotted Bennett twice earlier that evening, he remained out of sight and managed to stay hidden. Rick had considered informing Bennett of his plans, but not knowing him well enough, he opted against it to avoid any accidental slip-ups. An hour after dinner was over, and Cindy still hadn't shown up in the hall, Rick decided to go look for her and surprise her. He checked the room where the food was served and the courtyard outside the establishment, but did not find her. However, he heard voices around the corner, one of which undoubtedly belonged to his wife. Perhaps she was clarifying some details of tomorrow's wedding with someone from the staff. Just before he turned the corner, he heard her voice. "Not here, baby. Please don't touch me. Wait until we get back to your room." When Rick turned the corner, he could hardly believe his ears and saw the most terrible sight in his life. His beloved wife was pinned against the wall, and a man was standing next to her. At first, they didn't notice him because it was completely dark, and Cindy was saying, "Take me to bed, my love." Cindy briefly opened her eyes and screamed, "Rick! What? No!" Bennett quickly turned his head and released Cindy from his hold, stepping back as though he had seen the ghost of Christmas future and his own gravestone. His dark complexion turned pale. Meanwhile, Rick absorbed the scene and immediately realized his life was over. He slumped against the wall, tears welling up in his eyes, and began sinking to his knees as he struggled to grasp the reality of the situation. Cindy moved to his side as he crouched on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. "Rick, baby. Please, oh Rick. Oh no, what have I done?" Too stunned to react quickly, Rick let Cindy comfort him for a moment as they both began to cry. Bennett, for his part, retreated several steps with his hands behind his head, as if he had just finished a long sprint and was trying to catch his breath. Fear was evident in his eyes. After a brief pause, Rick glanced up at Cindy, who was cradling his face in her hands. The only word that escaped his lips was, "Why?" Cindy began to respond, but as Rick started to regain some emotional composure, anger began to seep in. "No, Cindy," he said, rising abruptly and stepping back. Cindy, kneeling and gazing up at him with pleading eyes, struggled to find words. Nothing she could have said would have made a difference at that moment. "No, Cindy, don't talk to me. Don't say a single word." He glared at Bennett with venom in his eyes. "Take her back to your room, you bastard. She's all yours." As he turned to leave, Cindy stood and reached out to him from behind. He spun around. "Don't you dare touch me, you bitch. You're the mother of my children. You were the love of my life. You were everything, and now you've destroyed us. You've destroyed me. Just go with your lover and leave me the hell alone." Cindy, struck by a rare moment of clarity, decided to let him go. She realized this wasn't the right time or place to try to placate him or offer explanations. She had shattered his heart, evident in his eyes. She needed to give him space. For now. Overwhelmed and in shock herself, she wouldn't have been able to say anything meaningful anyway. She signaled to Bennett to leave her alone and then retreated to her room, where a perfectly made bed with pristine white sheets, pillows, and blankets awaited. She collapsed onto the bed. Cindy Thompson struggled to control her heartbeat and breathing. The 34-year-old wife and mother of twins faced a crisis of her own making and was terrified there seemed to be no way out. Rick was starting to clear his head and emerge from the emotional haze that had clouded his thinking. He returned to his room and sat at the desk for an hour, unmoving. Eventually, he managed to gather himself and contemplate his next steps. He knew he wasn't going to stay here any longer than absolutely necessary. But what should he do? Where should he go? He decided that driving home was the best option. He wouldn't get there before 7 a.m. anyway, and he could stop by the office, which would be empty on a Sunday. He could shower, shave, and change into clean clothes. By then, he'd have an explanation ready for Mrs. Bowling about his early return. He could put on a brave face, at least for the sake of his children. Before he left, he wrote a note to Cindy and left it in an envelope on the desk with her name on it. "Cindy, I'm heading home to be with the kids. I'm not sure what to do right now and need some time to think. To say that you have devastated me would be like saying the Titanic had a minor leak. I'm drowning in despair and don't know where to turn. When you get home, or if you come home, please text me in advance. I plan to leave as soon as you arrive. I don't want to speak to you or even look at you until I've had time to process everything. I'll tell the kids that I need to be out of town for work this week, but their mom will be with them. I hate the thought of leaving them in your care, but I see no other option. Please do not call, text, or try to contact me in any way after you let me know you're a few minutes away. I know it's a lot to ask, but I hope there's a sliver of decency left in you to respect this first step toward ending our relationship. Though, to be honest, you already took the first steps when you started your affair. I gave you all of my love, heart, mind, and soul, and you trampled on it and discarded me. Right now I feel an intense and pure hatred towards you. How could you possibly do this? Rick." When Bennett emerged from his room an hour or so later, he found that Rick had left. He also discovered a note and planned to deliver it to Cindy the next morning. However, as he stood outside her door listening to her weeping, he couldn't bring himself to give her what was bound to be more devastating news. He cursed himself for being so nonchalant during their encounter. He had always prided himself on being alert to potential disasters, but this time he failed, and now someone he cared deeply about was hurting, and he felt powerless to help. Later, after her sobs had faded and it was clear she had fallen asleep, he quietly entered her room and placed the note on her bedside table. Then he stood by her door, unsure why, but feeling a need to do something. Cindy woke around 6 a.m. after just a few restless hours. Though she hadn't intended to sleep, the emotional strain had exhausted her. She got up, washed her face, and used the bathroom. As she came out and began to cry again, she noticed the note. Cindy had always prided herself on being strong for herself, her family, and her friends, but seeing the envelope left her completely undone. She anticipated it would be bad, possibly terrible, and felt she deserved whatever message Rick had left. With tear-filled eyes, she sat on the bed, opened the note, and read it. Overcome with emotion, she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Bennett walked into the room, knelt beside her, and held her close. She clung to him tightly. Though she felt a strong urge to blame him and accuse him of seducing her, she recognized that their relationship had been mutual. She recalled the first time he had insisted she commit fully, or he would end things immediately. She also remembered Laurie's warnings. No, Cindy realized that while she had made many mistakes, she wasn't a victim. She had made her choices, and now she had to deal with the consequences. "I'm going home as soon as I can compose myself, Bennett. I don't know what the future holds, but I need to face the reality." "I understand, Cindy. I wish things were different, but I know you well enough to understand that you won't run away or shift the blame for your decisions. You are an incredible woman and a good friend. If I could take this burden from you, I would, but I know I can't. Just remember, I'm always here for you." "Thank you, Bennett. I sincerely hope this doesn't cause you any pain, but I can't be sure. I might call you with an update once I know more, but we should both be prepared for the possibility that we may never speak again." He embraced her warmly, as a friend rather than a lover, and simply said, "I understand. before getting up and leaving the room, quietly closing the door behind him. He instructed the staff to bring her car around, but to give her some space. He mentioned that she was dealing with a difficult family situation and was upset that morning. The newer staff nodded in acknowledgement and went about their tasks, while the more experienced staff, who knew Mr. Thomas and what had transpired, sensed the somber mood that lingered over the property for the rest of the day. When Cindy was 15 minutes from home, she sent a text to Rick. 15 minutes out. Is there any chance you could come back after the kids are asleep so we can talk? It's all my fault, but I'm hoping we can find a way forward. Cinderella. Rick replied, I'm on my way. The kids have had their dinner. This will be our last communication until I reach out to you again, Cindy. Please respect my request. As Cindy read his response, tears welled up in her eyes. She realized that the name Cinderella would likely never be spoken by him again. She was no longer his loving wife and best friend, but was now seen as the unfaithful wife who had disrespected him in the worst possible way, by being with another man. What would become of their family? At the end of what felt like the longest week of her life, Rick called. Cindy answered halfway through the first ring. Hi, Rick. I'm glad you called, she said with a kind and hopeful tone. His response was flat. Cindy, I'll be coming home this afternoon around 5 p.m. I've managed to keep up with work somehow this week. He choked up momentarily before regaining his composure, leading to a painful pause. Cindy waited. I'll put on my poker face and try to act normally around the kids. I'm hoping I can manage that for 3 hours. Then I'll sleep in the spare room and won't speak to you until tomorrow morning when the kids are up. I'll make sure to get up early so they don't notice our separate sleeping arrangements. Is that okay with you? Yes, Rick, Cindy replied softly. Whatever you think is best. She hesitated before asking, when do you think we can talk? Despite knowing she was at fault, she desperately needed some insight into his feelings. I've arranged for Mrs. Bowling to babysit on Sunday afternoon. We can find a quiet spot in the park to sit and talk then. I think it's best if we spend all day Saturday with the kids, since we don't know how many more days we might have with them. His words, if any, hit her like an unexpected blow to the stomach. The pain in his voice made her want to vomit. She had never heard him sound like this before. He had always been strong, even during difficult times, but this was different. Betrayal was a harsh taskmaster. All she could manage to say was, "Okay, honey." Rick responded in a tone so emotionless and flat that it shook her to her core. Please never address me with terms of endearment again. I'm not honey or baby, and you certainly aren't my Cinderella. We're just two adults trapped in a nightmarish situation from which we may never escape. Please don't use words that feign love or affection toward me. Ever again. He ended the call without waiting for a reply. Cindy sank into her chair, her shoulders trembling as she cried. Somehow, they managed to get through Friday night with pizza and a movie, even sharing a few laughs at Michael's reasons for wanting a dog. Saturday was more of the same, a charade of normalcy. A few times, they thought Sarah might sense something was wrong, but they pushed through, making a concerted effort to appear as a loving couple in front of their children. The worst moment came when Michael called for a group hug while they walked along the beach. The vacant look Cindy saw in Rick's eyes nearly shattered her, even as his hug remained firm and deceitful about his true feelings. Sunday morning was spent with pancakes and lounging in pajamas. Rick told the kids that he and Mom were going out together and that Mrs. Bowling would be babysitting that afternoon. Sarah and Michael were not thrilled by the idea. They wanted more family time, but their dad was insistent, so they hurried to their rooms to change for the day. When they arrived at the park, they strolled for a while until they found a secluded spot with a small picnic table. Rick took a seat facing the park, directly across from Cindy. Just like him, she thought. He always wants to keep an eye on the crowd around him, to know if any trouble might be coming. "I'd like you to go first, if you don't mind," Rick began. "I'm worried that if I speak first, I won't be able to control my words. I promise I won't interrupt you, and I want you to say whatever you need to. Whether it takes 5 minutes or 50, it's important to me that you get your say. If that works for you, please feel free to start whenever you're ready." Cindy paused for a moment. It felt a bit like a negotiation, and in this setting, she never wanted to speak first. However, since she was the one who had caused this situation, it was only fair that Rick be allowed to lead the conversation, as he saw fit. "Sure," Cindy replied, trying to sound supportive of his wishes. "I'm not sure where to start, Rick. I've been thinking about what I would say since last Friday night." She trailed off, unable to revisit the moment or the pain she saw in his eyes. "You deserve the truth, and I will do my best to give it to you. I've been in a physical relationship with Bennett for most of the past 8 months." She buried her head in her hands at this confession, but then looked up, signaling him to continue. "I've never been attracted to a man or had an inappropriate relationship with anyone before meeting him. I didn't seek him out or pursue him due to any shortcomings in our relationship. While I didn't actively pursue him, I can't say I resisted his friendship and flirting. I realized early on that despite how amazing the business side of this could be, for the first time ever, I was drawn to someone other than my husband. I'm not defending him or trying to make this worse for you than it already is, but when we were first together, he stopped me before our first kiss and made me decide if we would move forward. He said he didn't want to push himself on me and would only continue if I wanted it as much as he did. I kept going, not because I was forced or pressured. No one made me do anything against my will. I still can't fully explain why I was drawn to it or why I did what I did, but I won't play the victim. Whatever happens between us now is entirely my responsibility." "Bab!" She quickly corrected herself. "I'm sorry, Rick. I want to tell you that I love you with all my heart, that this meant nothing to me, and I want to beg for your forgiveness and a chance to heal together. But I now realize that I've been holding back a part of my heart from you these past few months. You probably didn't notice, or at least I don't think you did. But when I was with you, a small part of me was elsewhere, with Bennett. If it hadn't been, I wouldn't have done what I did. I lied to you, and I lied to myself. I convinced myself that I did love you fully, that this would pass, and everything would be fine. You'd remain blissfully unaware, and we'd raise our kids and grow old together. I guess deception starts within before it extends to others. I betrayed everything I held dear. I don't know how this will end, or how it will impact our children, but I know it won't be good, even if our relationship can be saved. Finally, at least for this first conversation, I want you to know how terrible I feel about what I've done. Sorry doesn't begin to cover it. I'm not sorry that I got caught. I'm devastated by what I've done to the only person who has ever loved me unconditionally for who I am. Whatever happens to us, I'll need professional help to work through this. I've messed up more than I ever thought possible. I used to think I was a good person, but I've realized, perhaps too late, that I'm not. I have deep, ugly flaws, and they're mine alone. I'm responsible. I'm so deeply ashamed, and I want you to know that." Rick's head was bowed as he cried. It was fortunate they were in a secluded spot because his emotions were overwhelming. The joy, contentment, friendship, love, and mutual respect had all been stripped away and replaced with despair, grief, loss, humiliation, and emptiness. He wanted to respond with anger, to shout at her and curse her, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. She likely would have preferred an angry outburst over the soft sobs escaping his mouth. Once again, it hit her like a ton of bricks, just how much she had taken from him. After what felt like 10 hours, but was actually only 10 minutes, he finally composed himself and spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried a firm resolve. "Cindy, I don't know if this will be the last time we ever talk alone as husband and wife. I'm still trying to make sense of everything. I appreciate you not insulting me further by saying you love me or that it was just a mistake, just intimacy. Nothing more. Thank you for being honest about what happened. At least I hope you're being honest, though I guess I'll never truly know." Cindy buried her face in her hands, overwhelmed by the painful truth of his words. It stung deeply, but she forced herself to look at him as he continued. "You've been sleeping with Bennett behind my back for 8 months, once a month or more. You're right. I was completely oblivious because I trusted you with everything, my love, my heart, my life. I know I can never trust you again. The fairy tale is over, and there's no prince to come to the rescue. I've never felt hopeless before, and I hate how it feels. But it's the one emotion I can clearly identify right now. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not divorcing you now or anytime soon. I once heard a psychologist say that if you're married with kids and thinking about divorce, you should throw yourself in front of a bus instead. Kids can deal with loss much better than the sense of abandonment that comes with divorce. That always made sense to me, but I never imagined it would apply to my life. But the alternative of playing house for the next 11 years until the twins graduate and leave for college is unbearable. I can't stand the thought of it. I can barely look at you, let alone pretend we're who we once were. So 48 hours into this disaster, I'm stuck, hopeless and despairing. I see no way forward. I'm going to talk to a counselor this week to see what they might suggest." Cindy's expression brightened at this, but Rick quickly added, "I'm not doing it for you or our marriage. I'm doing it for my sanity and in the hope that I can find a way to keep at least a small shred of my dignity and love my children well." Rick interrupted her, and Cindy asked, "Where will we stay? Should I book a hotel or find a small apartment?" "I want us to stay in the house for now," Rick responded. "I think if I go on a business trip once a week to get some space, and you take a couple of work weekends in the next month, like you usually do, I can handle it. What you do, where you go, and who you spend your time with when you're away is your business. I won't let myself care about you right now, so if you prefer being with Bennett, go ahead." "Rick, I'm not planning to—" Cindy started to object, but Rick cut her off, raising his hand to stop her. "Please, Cindy, just stop. You're acting like you're talking to someone who cares about what you do, who you sleep with, or how you behave. The only way I'm surviving right now is by caring about you the same way you've cared about me for the past 8 months. You didn't care about me or my life, so now I'm choosing to do the same with you. Maybe the counselor can help me find a healthier way to protect myself, but until then, you're on your own." They both sat in silence, crying for the next half hour. No comforting words, no hands held across the table. Arms crossed, heads down, tears falling. Laurie's warning had come true. The consequences were more than Cindy felt she could bear. Little did she know, the worst was yet to come. For the next month, they led a surreal existence. In front of the children, they acted as if everything was normal and fine. They attended Sarah's soccer matches and Michael's karate lessons. They were convincing during the parent-teacher conference in the middle of the month. Miss Snyder never suspected that anything was wrong. But once the children were asleep, behind closed doors, it was a completely different reality. Cindy would look at Rick with pleading eyes, hoping he would be willing to talk, while Rick struggled to keep himself from completely falling apart. Cindy had taken responsibility for her actions, which perhaps not all wives would have done, but that didn't erase the betrayal and humiliation Rick felt. Each week, Rick would tell the kids he had an overnight business trip. He would leave late in the afternoon and return just in time for dinner the next day. He used this time to walk, think, and plan a way forward. He knew that if he wanted to move on, he would need to continue seeing his counselor for a long time. Rick had become a partner at his firm because of his exceptional analytical skills. He could assess the risks and benefits of investments better than most. He had a keen eye for details, and even the smallest opportunity or risk did not escape him. Now, he applied this analytical thinking to his home life. What are the pros and cons of staying with Cindy? What would be the long-term and short-term impact on the kids of staying together in a lie, getting a divorce, or how would the firm react if this came to light? Part of why they respect me is because of my commitment to Cindy and our family. How will the finances work in the future, whether we divorce or stay married, or what will Cindy do with her business? Continuing with Bennett's Hotels is out of the question, but does she realize that? Is Cindy just sorry for what happened? Or does she genuinely want something different and better in her life? She's in pain from getting caught, but how will she come to terms with who she has become and what she's done? What are all my options? Is there something besides divorce or staying together? It was this last question that caught Rick's attention as the best possible path forward. There was a third option. It was radical, incredibly difficult to execute, but it might be the best solution for everyone involved, including himself. So, on the third evening of his business trip away from home, Rick sat on the patio of the Marriott courtyard where he had been staying. He began to examine his solution from every angle and perspective. His planning would have to be meticulous, and the execution even more so. But maybe, just maybe. 2 weeks had passed, and while the plan was still taking shape, Rick felt it was coming together well enough that he decided it was time for a serious conversation with Cindy. He knew it might take a couple of hours, but it was necessary. He arranged for Mrs. Bowling to babysit, and then deliberately drove Cindy back to the park, where they had first talked about her infidelity. Sitting at the same picnic table where the painful truth had been revealed, they resumed their conversation. Rick started. Cindy, I know the past few weeks have been incredibly difficult for both of us. I appreciate you giving me the space and time I asked for to think things through. I want to share some thoughts with you and then give you a chance to respond. I hope that's all right with you. Cindy nodded, and he continued. I don't want to go over everything that's happened again, especially the night I found you with Bennett. I've already told you how deeply devastated I am. I'm not perfect, nor am I a perfect husband, but I've always been 100% committed to you and our children. I've never cheated on you, not even flirted with other women. The idea of anyone replacing you in my heart is unimaginable. I was captivated by you from the day we met, and I believed you felt the same. We were complete together, not needing anyone else. I always assumed we'd grow old together. But I was wrong about the depth of your commitment to us and about our chances of staying married. Cindy looked at Rick with longing in her eyes. Rick, she pleaded. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I hope we can find a way to address the pain and betrayal I've brought into our relationship. I don't want to give up on us. I want to work with all my strength and every fiber of my being to see if we can stay together. Rick gazed into the distance before replying. Cindy, I believe you're sincere, and I've thought long and hard about that possibility for us. On one hand, I do think there's a chance for enough confession and forgiveness to keep us together. Cindy's face brightened with hope. But, Rick continued, I've realized that won't work for me for 2 reasons. First, While I believe we could reach forgiveness, I don't see how we could ever rebuild trust. The truth is, if you told me the sky was blue or the grass was green, I wouldn't believe you. I'll never again see you leave for work without suspecting you're meeting your lover or someone new. I can't live with you without constant doubts about your fidelity. Secondly, I could never touch you as a husband touches his wife without seeing the face of the man you repeatedly chose over me. You wanted him, not me. You gave yourself to him without a thought for my love or our relationship. I can't imagine ever looking at you again without seeing Bennett Davis staring back at me. Cindy's shoulders slumped. She knew he was right, and she wanted to make him understand that she would be faithful from now on, for the rest of their lives, but she also knew she had no right to demand his trust. I want to fight for us, Rick. Don't you think we're worth fighting for? It was the first time Cindy had seen what could only be described as pure rage in his eyes. When he looked at her, she literally recoiled. Although he seemed to have regained some control over his emotions, there was a sharpness in his words. Fought for us? Do you want me to fight for us? What do you think I've been doing every day since we got married? Working hard and moving up the career ladder was our struggle. Spending time with our wonderful children has been our struggle. Remembering all the things you love and making sure you have them regularly is what the struggle meant to us. From the most insignificant to the most serious things, I have always tried my best to let you know that I will always be with us. How did you fight for us, Cindy? You slept with Bennett Davis over and over again. I'm sorry, but I don't understand why I'm giving up the fight for us. You gave up 8 months ago, and now it hurts that I can't just accept what you did and move on as if nothing had happened. Rick took a deep breath. His voice was full of emotion, and tears flowed from both of their eyes. I want to ask you so many questions, Cindy, but there's no point in asking them to someone who has been lying to you continuously for a long period of time. How could I ever trust your words? Maybe you're sorry, but maybe you only said that so you could date Bennett again, behind my back. I want to ask if you have learned any lesson from this, but no matter what you say, I just assume that the most important lesson for you will be how not to get caught next time. I so desperately want to go back to the old conversations when we shared our feelings with each other. But this couple no longer exists. You have destroyed us with your deception, lies, and betrayal. There is no way back, only forward to the best possible solution for all participants. The other day I realized that our evening at the Ritz took place after you were with Bennett. You slept with him over the weekend, and then you came home and let me buy wine and dinner for the woman I thought was my faithful wife. God, you must have been laughing at me in the shower. Your little cuckold, who didn't even know what a fool he was so excited to hear how proud his wife was of him. What a complete idiot I was. But no more than that. Cindy had no response, only a profound sadness for how deeply she had hurt the man she once claimed to love with all her heart for the rest of her life. He was right. He had fought for their relationship every day. It was she who had betrayed his love with her infidelity, showing a disregard for the husband she had adored just a year ago. But her infatuation, lust, and selfishness had destroyed all of that. Are you going to divorce me, Rick? She finally asked when she could find the words. No, Cindy. I'm not going to divorce you, and I'm not going to stay married to you either. I'm working on a solution that I believe will be best for everyone. It won't be without pain and loss, but I do think it's the only viable option. I promise to explain everything to you in a few more weeks. I'm not going to tell you what to do, Cindy, but I will outline my steps and my path in detail. I'm not asking for your input on my choices because, to be honest, I don't trust you to have my best interests, or our children's best interests, at heart. Once you understand my decisions, you'll be free to make your own. I won't try to control you in any way. But how will I know if you don't share it with me now? Cindy asked, genuinely confused by the direction the conversation had taken. She longed to reach out and hold him, to have him hold her, but it seemed that would never happen again. Rick looked her straight in the eyes with a calm, almost fatalistic acceptance, and replied, "You will know." They talked for a few more minutes, with Cindy gently probing for more details about Rick's vague explanation, but he remained firm. He insisted that she would understand when the time came. "A few months ago, my friend and colleague Lori warned me that if we danced to his tune, the piper would eventually show up and demand payment. I guess she was right." Rick was shocked to learn that Lori knew what was going on and tried to warn Cindy and Bennett. This discovery only increased his pain. "So, even before you slept with Bennett, you were warned, but you didn't stop. Didn't you come to me to talk about what you've been through? Did you just keep doing it?" Tears were streaming down his face now. Her husband was crying. Cindy couldn't stand it anymore and, covering her face with her hands, sobbed uncontrollably. When Rick moved, she thought he might be coming to comfort her. "Please, God, let him come and hug me," she prayed silently. Instead, he stood in front of her with his arms crossed over his chest. When she looked up, he said, "The piper came to get at least part of the payment, and maybe one day he will pay in full." 2 weeks and 4 days later, Rick left for his weekly business trip to be alone and deal with his pain. He hugged and kissed his children goodbye, and Cindy noticed that he looked a little sadder than he had in the last few days. It must be hard for him to say goodbye, even for just 24 hours, she thought. Cindy began to sleep a little better at night, thanks to the intake of melatonin, which helped her cope with nighttime difficulties when falling asleep. Rick suggested that the children spend the night with Mrs. Bowling and her cat. Mrs. Bowling became a kind of aunt for the children. He also offered Cindy a couple of glasses of wine to get a good night's sleep. Cindy agreed, and Mrs. Bowling was more than happy to receive her young friends. The next morning at 5:30 a.m., Cindy's cell phone rang non-stop for 3 minutes before she finally heard it, turned around, and picked up the phone. The caller's number appeared on the display, 911. Cindy tried to shake off her drowsiness as she answered the phone with a groggy, "Hello." "Is this Cindy Thomas, the wife of Richard Thomas?" came a very formal voice on the other end. Cindy immediately sat up in bed. No one ever called him Richard. "Yes, it is." "Is everything all right?" "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thomas, but can I first confirm that you live at 918 South El Camino Court? Is that correct?" "Yes," she replied, almost shouting. "And could you please tell me the make and model of your husband's car?" "A dark gray 2019 Lexus ES. Why? Has something happened?" "Mrs. Thomas, I regret to inform you that your husband was involved in a single-car accident on California Highway 79, just west of the Pacific Crest Trailhead near Warner Springs." "Oh no, my God!" Cindy gasped. "Is he okay? Is he at the hospital or in an ambulance?" "I'm deeply sorry to tell you, Mrs. Thomas, but the crash was fatal. I don't have any more details at this time. But his body is being transported to UC San Diego Medical Center and should arrive within the hour. I'm truly sorry for your loss." Cindy was stunned, unable to move or comprehend what she had just heard. The news hit her like a bomb, and her screams could have echoed down the block for anyone awake at that hour. She cried and screamed into her pillow for nearly an hour until she was completely exhausted. Eventually, she began to process the situation. She needed to tell the kids, but how and when? She had to call her mom and Rick's parents back in Denver. She desperately needed a friend, but wasn't sure who to turn to. She had to get to UCS DMC immediately. But could she even drive herself there? Kelly was in Europe on business and wouldn't be able to help for several days, if at all. She splashed water on her face, dressed as quickly as she could, pulled her hair into a ponytail, and was heading for the front door when the doorbell rang. How strange, she thought. It's so early. It was Brad Stanton, the family lawyer and one of Rick's closest friends. He looked like he'd been through hell. "Cindy, I heard about the crash on the early morning news. I'm so sorry." At that moment, she collapsed into his arms, sobbing and shaking uncontrollably. Brad held her for a moment in the doorway. Just then, Mrs. Bowling emerged from her house in a bathrobe, hurrying across the lawn with concern etched on her face. Cindy couldn't speak, so Brad explained the situation. Mrs. Bowling began to cry as well, but she quickly moved in to take the younger woman into her comforting embrace. After a few moments, Cindy started to regain some composure and insisted on going to the hospital in San Diego. "I have to see him. I need to see my Rick." Brad and Mrs. Bowling agreed on a plan. Mrs. Bowling would look after the kids, come up with a quick explanation for why their mom wasn't around, and get them off to school. The kids would find out soon enough. It didn't have to be now. Brad insisted on driving Cindy, and within 5 minutes, they were on the road. Cindy's phone was flooded with calls and texts from friends. She called her mom, who promised to catch the first flight possible. Then Cindy had to break the devastating news to Connor and Lily Thomas, Rick's parents. It was terrible. They too vowed to get on the earliest flight they could find and expected to arrive by the time the kids returned from school. Cindy then turned off her phone, stared out at the Pacific Ocean, and began to cry again. The next 5 days were a nightmare. Explaining everything to the kids, thankfully with the help of the grandparents and Mrs. Bowling, was incredibly difficult. Cindy had to deal with the authorities, the insurance companies, there were 3 different life insurance policies, make funeral arrangements, and contact clients who had scheduled weddings or family gatherings with her. The list of tasks seemed never-ending. Cindy was also overwhelmed with questions. What was Rick doing over an hour away from town on a deserted road so early in the morning? Although no one was using the word reckless, it was clear that he had been speeding. A toxicology report showed there was nothing in Rick's system except blood. No alcohol, drugs, or other substances that could have impaired his driving. His stomach contents revealed he had eaten steak, salad, and potatoes the night before, with only water to drink. Cindy was utterly perplexed. Bennett had picked up his phone several times to text Cindy after hearing the news, but ultimately he chose not to. He knew she was in unimaginable pain and realized that hearing from him would only make things worse. Lori was in a meeting with a new client when she received the news. Her administrative assistant, Stacy, noticed the pain on her face but found it strange that she didn't seem entirely surprised. Lori did not attend the funeral. The funeral took place on Friday morning, and everyone who knew Rick was there. Cindy was overwhelmed by the stories people shared about him. She had always known he was amazing, but as more stories were told, it became clear that her husband had been one of the most loyal friends, caring co-workers, generous bosses, and respected individuals most people knew. This realization plunged her deeper into despair, as she couldn't help but think that if she had been more attentive to her husband, her affair with Bennett would never have happened, and Rick would still be alive. She was about to find out just how true that was. Late on Sunday afternoon, Brad arrived at the house. He spoke briefly with Cindy's mom and in-laws, who quickly gathered the kids and left. As Cindy descended the stairs, she noticed Brad sitting at the kitchen table with a self-satisfied grin, like a cat that had just caught a canary. Cindy was puzzled by his expression and demeanor. She offered him a drink, which he declined, instead inviting her to join him at the table. He started, "Cindy, I need to tell you two things before I give you what I've been instructed to deliver. Although I'm your friend, today I'm here representing a client. That client is Rick. Cindy gasped, covering her mouth. Rick continued, I refer to my client as Rick because, even though he's passed away, I'm still handling his affairs, both legal and financial. The second thing you need to understand is that I had no prior knowledge of what would happen to Rick. This seemed strange to Cindy. How could anyone predict an accident or even foresee that one would happen? Rick sensed her confusion. Rick instructed me, both verbally and in writing, to carry out his wishes if anything ever happened to him. He paid me in full for this work, despite my offer to do it as a friend. He insisted everything be handled legally and properly. I don't know what's in this letter, but I do know it's from Rick to you. I've been directed to deliver it to you and then leave immediately before you read it. Cindy took the letter from Brad, her hands trembling. What else did he ask you to do? She inquired. Brad looked slightly embarrassed but replied, I'm very sorry, Cindy, but that information is confidential between me and my client. Rick explicitly forbade me from sharing any details about our discussions, my duties, or his wishes. I sincerely apologize. With that, Brad stood up and left without waiting for Cindy's response. Cindy, by now, you are aware of my passing and that the funeral has concluded. Brad has given you this note and has since departed. The kids are with my parents or your mother, and they know not to return home for a few hours to give you some time to process this. This is your third option, Cindy. It's the best solution I could come up with. I loved you deeply, but now that love is gone because you took it away, this is the best I can offer. 1. You will find out that I bought 3 acres of land by the lake at Eagle's Nest 2 weeks ago. This explains why I was driving on Highway 79 when the accident happened. I bought the property as a surprise for you and the kids, a place we could enjoy during summers and long weekends, given our recent promotions and increased earnings. 2. This is a ruse. The property purchase is a cover story, but you must stick to it. The insurance companies will withhold the death benefits if they suspect anything suspicious about my death. I visited the new cottage for some work and decided to head back early, as I had a 9:30 meeting with a client. My haste and speeding led to the accident. The insurance companies might investigate, but they won't find anything wrong. Brad will handle this as long as you adhere to this story. 3. Regarding the insurance, I've updated my will recently. 90% of my assets, approximately $3 million, will go into a trust fund for the kids. They will have access to it for college and grad school if they choose, with the remainder available to them on their 30th birthday, divided equally. Brad will manage these details when the time comes. I've left you 10% or about $300,000 to support you until you start working again in a month or so. I would have left you nothing if I could, but I understand you need to support the kids while you appear to grieve, so this should be sufficient. 4. Regarding our children, I once mentioned that a psychologist advised that death is easier for kids than divorce. I researched and found studies supporting this view. That's why I couldn't bring myself to divorce you, Cindy. I couldn't do that to my children. They might eventually learn the truth and possibly resent me, but I hope not. If they do, I hope someone will help them understand how unfair life can be. For now, they can mourn without the added pain of divorce. 5. I can't dictate what you should do with your life next. You might consider returning to Bennett, or perhaps someone else has caught your interest. Whatever you choose, please prioritize the children and do what's best for them. They will be out of the house in 9 to 10 years, so maybe keep your relationships private until then. 6thly, I have a small request. After reading this note, please burn it completely. If the insurance companies find it, It will jeopardize our children's financial future. Read it through a few more times, but if I ever meant anything to you, destroy this note. Don't worry. You might hear from me again someday. Rick. Cindy wept as though she had never cried before. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing and wailing while calling out Rick's name. The weight of her affair had overwhelmed her, and she feared it was more than she could handle. After about an hour, she mustered the strength to sit up and read the note 2 more times. Then, she moved to the fireplace and burned it until only a small pile of ashes remained. The piper had indeed come calling, or so she believed. It had been 12 years since that fateful day when Rick Thomas perished on California Highway 79. The truth is, he died the moment he saw his wife with another man, betraying him, their children, and their future. The rest was just the details of how and when it happened. Cindy never remarried and kept Rick's death a secret, as he had wished. She used the $300,000 to support their family during her mourning period. It was over a year before she returned to work. She tried to put on a brave front and continue with her business, which focused mainly on weddings and family reunions, but it became too much for her. She then joined a company specializing in business event planning and thrived in her new career. In her personal life, Cindy dated occasionally but never found anyone who measured up to Rick. She saw herself as damaged goods, though counseling helped with that issue. She often wondered if she met someone and got married again. Would she be unfaithful once more? Michael and Sarah urged her to date and try to find someone, insisting, "Dad would want you to be happy." She reflected, "Yes, he always wanted me to be happy." But she also realized she had used that very desire as part of her justification for betraying him. The pain would come rushing back.